Welcome to Cyber Salon and welcome to Games for Good series. We've been running that series for a couple of years now. And the main event today is about exploring games and collaboration. So I'll be talking a little bit introduction about what is collaboration, how we can define it. Then we'll have few reviews of games that we thought were particularly salient to collaboration and digital cultures. And we're hoping to get Skype with Douglas Rashkov at 8 o'clock. And after wrap-up, students will do reviews of the games in the foyer, and then we probably wrap up by about 10 o'clock. So just very briefly, Cyber Salon has been born out of combination of the first word Cyber Cafe, which we started back in 1994, just a while ago. And about 1997, it started going horribly wrong because cookies arrived and the surveillance machine kicked in, and we figured out that this is not going to be a smooth ride. So we got together with Hypermedia Research Center, which was the world's first hypertext new media degree, which Richard Barbrook founded in Westminster. And we started developing more of a critical media study and critical engineering approach to what was going on our screens. So early as it was already looking a bit dodgy. And I think since then it only got worse. So Siberia was my experience of collaboration, probably my first one. 4 very different people, a techie, a business guy, an events person, an UX person. I know quite a few of them, of you here, UX people. So UX is very central to Siberia. And this is what the first cyber cafe looked like, with huge computers, which were initially used for gaming, but also a little bit of email. People used to take, well, at the beginning we only have Mosaic, so it wasn't much of a browsing. But if you see the size of the machines, well, they were small comparing to what everybody else had. But slowly, we migrated more into gaming, and under Siberia, we created something called Sub-Siberia, which was basically a gaming den. And people like Richard Bartlett, Dungeon and Dragon people started coming and gaming there. Again, we used to lock the door and just feed them pizza and see what they emerge like in the morning. And actually, Siberia was a really successful collaboration because although each of us 4 partners had very different interests, we all came together in this new media space to create something that each of us wanted to add to the conversation. So my contribution was training for women. My idea of Siberia was there was supposed to be just women training, except when we opened, we had, queue 3 deep around the block, but only blokes. So that was the business plan that never really happened. And it took me, I think, good 3 years to get any women inside, but that's a separate story. So as we developed the concept of games and digital culture, we started investigating the kind of issues that are coming to the surface of digital world. So the last event was Games Against Hate. We reviewed few games that I thoroughly recommend. There is a video from that event. I think hate is more motivating than doing good things. So today we wanted to talk a little bit about good things, which is collaboration. But why collaboration? Why are we even talking about it? Because we're just so bad at that. Collaboration is something that seems to be a challenge for humanity that we can never crack. So we talk about it. There is thousands of scientific papers about collaboration, yet we're just not very good at it. So this recent few years, the massive failures of collaboration, obviously refugee situation, only 20 million people, yet we can't solve it, house it, figure it out. It's just not happening. And in Zakaria in Jordan, there's 3rd generation of children living in refugee camp. That is not a failure of collaboration. I don't know what is. Well, obviously, our homegrown failures. So over 16 million of us Remainers did not manage to organize ourselves properly to fight this all bullshit. Unfortunately, we lost. Massive failure, a lot to learn from. And obviously, the failure of the failures, which is Labour Party. I know many of you are on that side, but that was just, I wouldn't give them to organize Peace Up in the Brewery. And a shit show of the year. So I think we have to stop, think, review, and try to learn what we can do better, because how such a powerful bunch of organizations like unions, civic organizations, 500,000 members, how we couldn't get it together in any constructive shape. It's a big mystery. So let's unbundle it. And obviously the most recent failures, ecosystem is burning, kangaroos are not in the best of shape, yet everybody's talking, nobody's doing anything. And our own far-right rise in UK, Hungary, India, also in Poland, where I'm from, that's just looking like it's going to be worse than ever. So who is in charge and who are we up against? So what's the collaboration has to face? So at the moment we have two dictators and a populist, neither of them interested in ecology, conservation, refugees, and they learn one thing, that hate is a bigger driver than the need to do good. So we just have to rebalance it somehow. And I was born in Poland, so I can tell you democracy and ecology are absolutely, they need each other. No democracy, no ecological movement. So we have to fight for the democracy before we fight for the ecology, because one has got to have another. But there are successes, which we're going to look at today. So obviously the Thai Boys Rescue Mission was an amazing Agile collaboration success, despite the burst attempts of Elon Musk trying to ruin it for everybody and dropping his ego on top of quite well-organized event. They managed to do an amazing feat against all odds. And I think the lessons from there we should be studying for years to come. It was also very interesting, the leadership of that. We looked quite a bit at the leadership of the process. It was a very fluid leadership. There wasn't really somebody, an admiral at the beginning and an admiral at the end. It was very much a flexing situation where whoever looked like they knew most about any phase or episode of that rescue was given the charge. So they were able to flex and follow and lead as the situation was developing. So I think that is something that games can let us develop. And obviously my personal favorite, Wikipedia. Wikipedia is kind of like a slow collaboration. It's not rescuing Thai boys, it's not getting front pages, but many of us here are involved in it, and it's got the process. It may not have the truth, but it's got the process how to get to something resembling it. And it's got the trust, it's got very, very detailed, very arcane management, but something that works and something that we probably should consider following in great detail. Something that I wasn't aware of, but thank you to the emails from the Italians. We were looking for examples of collaboration, more recent. So there's a movement in Italy, and the Italians around? There's a movement in Italy at the moment called Sardines. So this is basically a movement against the far right, which doesn't really want to follow the populist Movimiento 5 Star, because that has gone towards very far right universe. And this is young people trying to organize themselves against the far right and against the corruption, against the mafia. Their symbol is sardines because there is more of us than them. And so far, they've been making really good noise and offsetting what's happening with Salvini. So I think we will follow them because it just gives a little bit of hope. So why games? Because if you look at the probably most typical age of gamers, so 26 to 35, there was a massive increase last year on the average hours spent online gaming. This also includes mobile gaming, so it doesn't mean that we suddenly discovered extra 2 spare hours to check at the games. It's more commute gaming, but all in all, it has gone up and up and up. So what is the opportunity that we can explore within the gaming universe, and how can we share the experience of collaboration in games, which is a very mature experience in many ways, with the external world? So going back to where we started from, we always look at archetypes and what's at the beginning of the beginning. So the Greeks had a very good concept of gaming. Athena is a goddess of games and collaboration. So we decided to run this program as a cult of Athena of the gamers. And what she was teaching us is there is a hierarchy, society of hierarchy, but also society of equals. So the collaboration of equals is something that we probably have an opportunity to develop, train, and practice within the game environment. It's kind of 5 issues that we're focusing on. So flexing, trust, empathy, process, and rewards. Rewards is probably the key. Not that many people talk about collaboration with rewards. A lot of people consider collaboration as a positive process in itself, that being part of collaboration is already good. It might be within Wikipedia, but we've noticed that within everything else, you need to be extremely clear about what are the rewards and how is the sharing of the rewards going to be executed. I think that was probably one of the biggest problems with Labour Party approach, because it wasn't very clear what was in it for anybody. It was very clear with the Johnson campaign, it wasn't clear with Labour. So the trust, empathy, process and rewards, but obviously they're underpinned by tools. So tools for communication, content management, workflow, you know, the little nitty-gritty detail that make projects successful or not. And when we looked at the kind of more abstract understanding of collaboration, if you look at the collaboration, it's actually the hardest of all approaches because it needs high assertiveness and high cooperativeness. These things generally kind of back against each other. So really to be a good collaborator, you have to practice a lot because either you fall into one or another. So just to round it up, so basically what is collaboration? It's all these things that we know about, but it's the responsibility, mutual authority, accountability for success, and sharing the rewards. In games, comes naturally. Outside of games, we're still struggling. And the times are complex. So if you look at the beginning, people called in experts to solve problems around 1900. Then by 1950, when everybody got smarter, the media got better, more people started solving problems. At the moment, we have to solve problems of the whole system, so we still have experts trying to do it, but what really we need to do is everybody needs to solve problems of whole systems. So we all just need to smarten up quickly. But we have allies, so we just started working with these guys. So Open Society University Network just kicked off in Berlin through University Bard College, Berlin and New York, and we underpinning our developments with them. So basically anybody who's interested in collaboration, civic stuff and gaming can join in the network. And our very good colleague, Gavin Stark, has just launched Icebreaker One, which is collaboration open data for climate crisis. They just got £1 million funding. And again, looking for help and collaboration for people who do open data. So anyone with interest in that, talk to us after. So that's kind of the shape of where we're looking, and we'd like to cover more specific examples of collaboration gaming through reviews of free games.
I'll be honest with you, I have a problem with multiplayer games generally. And it's not because I don't have enough friends to play them with, although that's also true. But there is something about, I think, my history with games and where it started from, which was in the arcade, which was in the, going to a space that was a common space, normally on a Saturday morning, normally sneaking out between one school event and another event and ending up in the arcade and playing the things. And games of that ilk were built to extract vast sums of money from you in 50p coins. So they happened fast, they happened noisy, it just got faster and faster, and then you died, and then you put more money in, and wash and repeat. And you didn't really play those games collaboratively, you played them competitively. You wanted the top high score, and you wanted that top high score to stay there until the next week has come around and you're still on the top high score. The gaming experience was definitely me and my mates all going to the arcade together. And so was actually an early programming experience of mine, which was playing the same game in the Northampton shopping centre, it was the W.H. Smith and the Boots and all the shops at the time that had the home computers. Where the game there was, you'd go in, you'd write your own 3-line computer program that would print your name on the screen in multicolours and scrolling, and hopefully lock long enough that you'd get it in all the 5 different computers that shop had in, get round the rest of the shopping centre and get back to the first shop, and it's still your game running. It was tons of fun, and it was social, but it was solipsistic, if you like. It was a singular achievement. And a lot of even my more recent gaming experience comes from that. So a lot of those sort of like, I will get my high score, I will win kind of stuff. I found a lot of the multiplayer games I came back to. I have friends who are in Galaxies. I had some friends who helped work on EverQuest and those kind of things. I met people who'd gotten married in EverQuest, which in itself blew my mind. But I never personally engaged in that part of multiplayer. But I loved indies. I really loved the indie game scene. And for those of you who haven't ever seen Journey, you're going to be in for a treat. For those of you that have, please allow me to indulge a bit more of that personal story. when Sony released the PlayStation 3, when the PS3 was out, it was really the first time that digital distribution of gaming was a viable thing. That meant a whole host of changes for the games development industry. So small indie houses, literally 2 graduates who'd collaborated on an MA project, could basically spin up a computer games company the following week and deploy to everything, which is actually what that games company did. That's how they got started. The only time I can think of anything similar would have been the 1980s in the UK, where literally anybody in their bedroom could just write it on a Commodore 64 and print the cassette tape. That industry of scale that, you know, supported Xbox and Sega and Nintendo, all those kind of wonderful things, for quite a while, the publishing mechanism was not a barrier. I don't want to call it a barrier, but the publishing, working with publishing was like getting a record deal. It was fantastic. You got publishing, you're done. Digital delivery of games, circa mid-noughties, lowered the barrier to entry for a whole host of developers. And I fell in with these guys' second game, really, which was called Flower, which was deliciously beautiful, very simple to play. And I'd bring it home to show with some of my friends who still socially game, sit together in the living room, put on the console. And I remember Keith sitting there looking at this thing, blowing one petal around from flowers to flowers, wondering when the army was going to come over the wall in the distance and where his guns were coming from. And it wasn't there. It was a hugely successful game, Flower, critically acclaimed, award-winning. I think it's actually in the Smithsonian in the States, if anybody can correct me. It might be the first computer game to actually make it into a museum as a work of art. And then they started talking about their sequel, which was going to be a multiplayer game. And that was really the first time it piqued my interest. Well, what kind of multiplayer activity might they be talking about? And the rumors that were being leaked, the idea that, you would meet up with somebody in this game, but you couldn't communicate with them. There'd be no chat, I was like, okay, well, that's odd. It says, you're all going to play the same character. There'll be no customization of your avatar. That's kind of odd. So none of these, there will only ever be 2 people in the game at one point in time. That's also odd. When we look at the same time in development, you've got Star Wars Galaxies sitting there saying, well, look, you have an entire parallel life, second life, a whole parallel world. Whereas, that games company was saying, I want to put you and some anonymous random person elsewhere on the planet that you won't be able to communicate with, that you won't know who it is, in a space that looks beautiful and see what happens. I was like, this is a multiplayer game for me. Right. So there's the background. When Ava and I and others were coming up with ideas for tonight, I just recently finished a book called On Tyranny, which is about a year or 2 old. And it came up, this quote had stuck in the back of my mind. And it's from partway through the book. It's a lot of pieces in this. I don't know if he's borrowed it from somebody else or if it's updated from somewhere else. But having old friends is a politics of last resort. Making new ones is the first step towards change. And that chimed with me, and it chimed with my experience with Journey. So for those of you who haven't heard Journey, that's the game that I'm going to be talking about. It was first released in 2012, so not mid-noughties. By that time, it was quite a bit further on, for the PlayStation 3. It was then re-released in 2005, updated for PlayStation 4, and then re-released again just last year for iOS and PC. We'll put my machine over there at the end of tonight, pair of headphones on it and a controller. Please feel free to spend some time, explore a level or 2. I'll be very careful throughout the presentation. No spoilers on Journey, and none at all. It's available on iPhone. I'll mention the prices and the links at the end of the game. Massively successful. In that first year release for PS3, it won 8 DICE awards in the first year. Game of the Year, Outstanding Innovation in Gaming. Casual Game of the Year, Outstanding Achievement in Game Direction. Outstanding Achievement in Art Direction. Outstanding Achievement in Online Gameplay. Yes, that multiplayer was in there. Outstanding Achievement in Original Music. It was the first computer game soundtrack and score ever nominated for a Grammy. It still is, I think, the only one that's ever been nominated in soundtrack for visual media, right to this day. And obviously, Game of the Year in IGN, Game of the Year by GameSpot. So the score in itself is a delight. And I won't dig too deeply into what it does. But when I started playing it again this year to replay it, to review my thoughts for this event, it wasn't a multiplayer game anymore. I was the only person playing it when I played it on the PC. I played it again on the iPhone, going, well, let's just see what it's like on that. I was the only person playing through it again on that. And then I thought, shoot, I don't have a multiplayer story anymore about Journey. So we came to the other game that game company have been working on, which is called Sky Children of Light, which I know some of the students have been reviewing and playing with, and we'll also talk about that later on afterwards. It has a far smaller list of accolades, but then it's only just came out last year. It's available for free, so by all means download it, go to the Apple Store, you'll get it for free, it's fantastic. It's currently a sign-up on Android for mobile. You can register to be notified for an invite to the beta. Some parts of the web tell you that you can find the APK, if you know what that means, to download and install, if you want to risk it. I wouldn't, to be honest with you. Reliably informed that this would be, like available properly through Google Play before the summer really digs in. So just wait if you're cautious. Recently it's been announced it will also come to Switch. So by the end of the year, hopefully, it'll be on tvOS, PC, console, and Switch. And maybe then we'll start seeing any accolades come in. And there's spoilers galore for Sky. Sorry, I don't like it. I'll explain why in a minute. So back to Journey for a second. Is this the video? Yes, this is a bit of video. So, tiny bits of trailer. It is deliciously gorgeous thing. I mean, if you've not seen it running, it is beautiful. The fact that it ran on the PlayStation 3 is incredible. Relentlessly beautiful, one quote at the time, which is kind of what my memories of it were. Most beautiful game of its time. Every moment is like a painting, framed art, fantastic stuff. The idea, the art direction behind it was to make any player feel small. You were alone in the desert, except you weren't. There'd be one other. But everything would be huge and intimidating, except it wouldn't be because there'd be somebody there with you. So the emotional hook, the idea that solipsists like me might find there being at least one other person in the world worth collaborating with, was kind of the hook. And it was on the third playthrough again this year. And I'm sitting there with my partner on the couch, and I'm just trying out a few screenshots that I wanted to capture. And then all of a sudden, another player entered the space. And I screamed, I hooted. I said, Julie, look, there's somebody else here. And I ran over to them, and then they ran over to me. And honestly, you play as these two characters. That little expanding bubble of white that it makes, that's your only means to communicate. You can press a button, hold it down, and it will make this chirrup, whip noise. That's your lot. You can see there's a bit of jumping going on, so you can jump and fly. You fly further as your cape gets longer. Well, I say cape, it's actually a scarf. I'm a huge Journey fanboy. I do actually own a Journey scarf, so I had to bring that tonight as well. And throughout the land, you'll discover things that will help you, grow your scarf. If you're playing on your own, you have to be quite careful. You only have so much jumping power. You have to find ways to recharge it. If you're playing with a friend, proximity to that friend recharges your cape. It recharges your jumping power. But there's no instructions for that. It doesn't say that anywhere. There's no title screen showing you what goes on. In fact, there's no word of text anywhere in the game from the title screen to the end credits. There are 2 overlays that show you which one button is and which joystick to move. And that's it. Everything else you figure out for yourself. There's not a lot to figure out, to be honest. I've pretty much just covered it. But the dynamic, the interplay, that if there's somebody else on that level with you, and there will only ever be one person or not, there'll be a tiny white dot somewhere on your screen, unless they're actually in visual range. If you fly over to them, you can chirp at them, and you can charge your coat off each other. And that's it. And for all that simplicity, all that minimalism of communication, the review that I share here, so we'll just jump out of the video a bit, but this was off of the Gamer Revolution review when the PC version came out. Or, no, actually, it was when the PlayStation 4 version came out. And it says, I loaded up the game the day it came out, awestruck by its beauty. An endless sea of sand, making an unforgettable first impression, but even more memorable is the first encounter with another player. And as I said, all the way through the PS3 and the PS4 and the first year of the PC release, it was very common that you would find someone else in there. The only form of communication is a series of small echoes with the press of a single button. So naturally, I spammed it the first time I encounter anybody, you know, bang, 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 bang. They do the same thing right back at him, and a strange connection is formed. You have no idea who this person is, and yet you feel the need to stick together. And that did stick with me. So that's kind of what's going on here. The multiplayer aspect of Journey has the fewest possible mechanics, I think, that you could really engineer into a multiplayer game. And if I'm going to talk about anything tonight, it'll be that. Yeah. If you're thinking of what makes a multiplayer dynamic, you know, what makes a gameplay mechanic work, you know, then Journey is your challenge, right? The art director at the time said he considered the game as a Chinese garden. So he wanted it to be a minimalist piece. And they spent most of the first and second year of development taking things away until there was, you know, really stripped back to the raw emotions. So there's no lobby, right? If you're going to meet anybody, they'll be in the level somewhere, and that's it, or you won't. They might persist. So if two players do decide to collaborate, help each other find greater jumps and heights, or just explore together, then you'll finish the level together, and if you finish the level together, it'll pair you both together entering the next one. There's about 7 levels to the game, so you can develop some rapport with these strangers. There's no naming. You're anonymous. So too is everybody you meet. On the PlayStation, the network requires you to have a PlayStation Network ID. It's kind of like an online presence. At the end of the game, all the way through, so whether that's 2 sessions, 1 session, or 20 sessions, when you finally make it to the end credits, it's only 4 hours long, so it's not that far, then it will show you a scrolling list of all the gamer tags that you encountered along the way, but only then. So it's your job to then go and look them up if you want to. And it won't tell you who was at where, who, at which level. They're just listed there. So it could be from 1 to a many. No required collaboration. Every puzzle and every level can be solved alone, which helps. And no chat. The only communication is this little chirruping. So it's up to you whether you collaborate or not. But that's the thing. I think, you know, it's a charming enough experience to encounter someone in that desert. And if you want a metaphor that will work for the collaboration idea we're talking about, I couldn't think of a better one than that. So it's with mixed feelings that I review this game, because part of me feels like this is, you know, a rarer experience now to have that multiplayer thing. Both Simon and I and John and I tried forcing this thing to have 2 people online at the same time, and we failed. You know, there are examples of people succeeding to get multiplayer running again, but 3 days later, I'm sitting there on the couch feeling sad and alone in Journey, and somebody randomly turned up in there. So, you know, you may have some success. There have been the odd anniversaries. So the 10th anniversary obviously has yet to occur. Maybe that would be a good time to jump in. It'll be a damn busy day. I can guarantee you that happens. This was a fan event that happened, well, March 12th. It was probably last year, beginning of last year. And, you know, follow it on Twitter, see what happens. I'm sure there'll be a multiplayer event. So yeah, mixed feelings. It's a fantastic game. It's a fantastic experience, but you might not, out of the box, get the experience you were expecting. And so with that in mind, I kind of felt that I needed to look at what this one was, which is only the 4th game that game company have ever done. The first one, Flow, was brilliant. Simple but brilliant. Flower, as I said before, was the only thing so far in a Smithsonian Museum of Gaming. Journey, and then Sky. So it's got pretty good pedigree, right? You know? It was announced in an Apple keynote expo in 2017, so a couple of years ago now. That immediately made me curious, nervous and curious all at the same time. It's been in beta for about 2 years. I was on the beta team for a while, dropped out, came back in, dropped out. Went into officially to launch last year. And it's definitely mobile first. It's definitely multiplayer first. A little bit of video. I'm just going to jump through this if I can. Hopefully I can. And I'm going to jump to a good minute in. Oh no. Don't do that. There we go. I'll talk over him while they're doing it. But these are the two primary designers and developers of this game. I would like to let it play long enough that you can see a little bit of the game moving, the same as we did for Journey, just to be fair, because, you know, again, they've knocked it out of the park in terms of making something look pretty and be beautiful. It is, again, very, very pretty. The idea that it works on your mobile phone is pretty impressive. Again, nice soundtrack. You know, it's a lovely little package, but it's not Journey. And in terms of collaboration, I think that's a really interesting question. Why is it not Journey? What seems so odd? Bearing in mind this was designed to be a social game. It was designed to have lots of people playing it rather than two. It was designed to have components that made you need to collaborate, and yet it doesn't come over as the same experience. I think I'm gonna probably mute that if I can. I can't seem to control that in here. Oh, here we go. This is where I would have come in. I think a lot of the screen captures you're seeing are on the tvOS version, but you know, it does work on mobile. I've played it pretty much to completion on my iPhone. Same kind of chirping, you know, similar kind of art direction and style. Some of the levels seem similar. That's kind of a key shot. We're going to pick that up in a second. Yeah. A little bit of comparisons to Journey. So for instance, here there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 8 players, which is its maximum collaborative moment. All 8 of these players have to have agreed to hold each other's hands and go on a fly, which is quite nice. They're going to go to a special part of the Journey land somewhere and unlock a temple that you can't get into unless all 8 of you are holding up candles in special places at special times. So yeah, we're basically, I would say, forced collaboration, right? You will not see all of Journey, all of Sky rather, unless you find enough friends to get you through it. So, okay, worth a try. Are there lobbies? Yeah, there's a ton of them. You've got your home lobby, you've got a level lobby, there's a constellation map of the night sky you can look up at, and it will show you where everybody you ever met is, what level they're on, and so forth. Naming. You can name everybody you meet with your own nickname for them. They've probably got their own nickname for you. Nobody knows who anybody really is at that point, but it just helps you organize it. And as it comes to chat, there's actually a bunch of chat options. You can leave messages in the world just by planting candles there and writing messages on them, kind of like souls. You can do the chirping thing, for sure. And you can also teach your character upwards of about 20 odd different gestures. That's where I started to lose it. That's a lot of things to learn just to accomplish the simple experience of otherness and togetherness with someone. So maybe it's for you. Maybe you love kind of that kind of game. As I said, there are plenty of people that do, and if so, it's going to cost you nothing to get started on it. Why not download it and have a try? Oh, well, if you're on a train or if you've got Wi-Fi issues, that's your first problem. It requires to be online all the time. If you try playing it on a train, certainly on my commute, it goes in and out. There is no option to play single player without it, so make sure you're on a good connection. Obviously, hopefully, the first time you play it, all of this makes sense to you because there's certainly no comfy casual on-ramp. Yeah, I'm going to move through this part of the presentation more quickly, save your time. I'm just going to get on with panning it as fast as I can now. There's instructions all the way through it, explaining more things that you have to do, more things that you might want to do, other things that you need to do, things that you had no idea were going to happen without quite explaining why they will. It still feels very much like it's in a beta. It still feels very much like they're asking the community what it's supposed to be. And the truth is they've been doing that for 2 years. So I feel very conflicted about this. I think this is the game they're going to launch. I think this is the one they play. But, you know, it was quite fun having a friend to go and unlock that first thing with. So I thought, we'll try that. So I sent John and Simon these QR codes, which, like, maybe this is a great solution to lobbies. Maybe this is the new idea. And it didn't work, did it? It didn't work even slightly. Not even slightly. And we're all on iOS. So I thought, well, what else can I do? So this is its instructions. These are all things I can do. I can make new friends, apparently, but I tried. And I couldn't. I can grow closer, and I ended up growing more frustrated and confused. I couldn't stay in touch because it would drop out every time I moved anywhere, and that may well be a problem of mobile gaming, and I might just be the kind of guy who lives on a PC. I don't know. But I'm not interested in just learning new ways to express myself. I loved the minimalism of Journey, that I was restricted in my expression. That made the game the challenge. Who am I going to show my appreciation to? Unfortunately, not the designers of this game, and I've no intention of staying in touch with them. So at the end of the day, I thought, well, at the very least, I will drop a URL in the biggest, prettiest lobby to the Cyber Salon event, just to let people know that we're interested in it, and it wouldn't let me. And I thought, I'm done. Thank you very much. I did go on to finish the game. I have done a few fun things, but it's far from a successor to Journey. So if you look at it, you see its beautiful graphics, you hear its equally intoxicating music, and you expect a different multiplayer Journey experience. It's not. I would say, stick with Journey. It'll still cost you money, and Sky's free. It could cost you £5 on a mobile phone, and it plays pretty well on a mobile phone. You don't need to be online. There's only a few glitches. It's worth it. It's only £3.29 on PlayStation Network at the moment. I noticed that. It's on some kind of until February 5th sale. Please save a coffee and buy this if you've got a PlayStation. Or £15 on PC. You're more likely than not to find it as a solo experience, but it is still incredibly good and thoroughly recommended. Sky, free, maybe in beta, eventually in PC and consoles. It's not Journey. So I can't recommend it, unfortunately. I know this is not supposed to necessarily be just a review, but there's a lesson here about what we might need a game to do if we want it to teach collaboration, or if we wanted it to teach about the other, or to tempt us beyond our solipsisms. And it's not give us more rules for communicating. We need to, as we said, it's goal-orientated. Give me an outcome. Let us just get there somehow. But let us believe it's possible. So I much preferred being presented with a problem of communicating, a restriction of how I was going to do it, and then actually to find out how easy it is to share time with another and to share space and collaborate on something. So that's me. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Caro, and I'm here to review Stardew Valley. I want to introduce myself by saying that on an average weekend I spend about 10 hours at a time building houses and families in The Sims, and then proceed to rebuild everything and kill all of my Sims. So when I looked up Stardew Valley for this event that Ava invited me to do, it was kind of right up my street, and I just, kind of got stuck into it. But what was interesting is, over time, as I kind of whipped out my phone on the bus or in an Uber or at my friend's house, everyone would go, "Oh, Stardew Valley, love that game." I was like, why did no one tell me about this? We wanted to talk about how Stardew Valley helps to leverage community to improve village life, but I think the biggest takeaway I got from this game was not necessarily the aspect of community, which is a big aspect of the game, but the aspect of reflection on both your digital and personal life. So I will introduce the game slightly, but I'm sure a lot of you have played it already. If you don't, I thoroughly recommend it. You will get stuck in it for 12 hours at a time. But within a couple of days, you kind of build up a routine. You wake up in the morning, you go and water your plants, you feed your chickens, you go and see your neighbour, you pick up the post. And it gives you that sense of achievement in small things in life, which in a big city like London, we might often lack. I think that was kind of the biggest thing that I got away from it, was that I kind of started reflecting about what I do every day. And when I wake up in the morning, why do I make a coffee instead of talking to my housemate first? Why do I, go on Twitter instead of texting my friend hello? And it really kind of brings that perspective into light, for me at least, which might sound a bit depressing, and maybe my life is, but there we go. But yeah, I also wanted to talk about the kind of sense of accomplishment and the mundane tasks that you carry out, and kind of, if anyone had pitched this game to me saying, so you build a farm, you plant some plants, you collect your parsnips, post some things and talk to your neighbours, I would be like, a pass. I'm a through and through Londoner, and I love living in London. City life is my life, but as soon as I opened the game, it was just a completely different experience. One of the main things for me was how inclusive it is. You can find the perfect shade of green for your skin color if you want, something that The Sims very much lacks still. But it's that inclusivity and that diversity that really drew me in, and the option of just focusing on kind of the bigger plan of how I'm going to expand my farm and take over the whole world, or whether I just want to have my little house by the river and just enjoy picking up parsnips every day. This shows kind of the beginning of the game, so there's not a lot of spoilers, but it does begin with some harsh truths, really, to be honest. You see your dying grandfather on his bed, bit depressing, if you ask me, and he gives you his farm, something that he has lived on for a really long time, something that he loved, and he kind of already invites you to have that experience of letting go of what you already know and moving to a place that is more wholesome and enjoying the culture and the environment you're in. I think that also taps into a big yearning that a lot of people working in London, a lot of millennials and boomers alike might feel is there's something else, there's something missing that we might feel we always have. And as great as everyone's life is, I think everyone kind of often thinks about, is there something more? And I think Stardew Valley really kind of taps into that and fills that gap for a lot of people, if it is a gap. There is a really good sequence in this that we're just going to go on to, that kind of years later, you're in your lovely job. I very much appreciated the nod to Amazon on the logo. And you're just doing the same thing that everyone else around you is. You're working, you're resting, you're working and you're resting, or you get terminated, whatever that means. And you have that kind of light bulb moment of, is this really enough? Is this everything there is? With that, you then decide to drop everything you have in your lovely life and move to your farm. You start off your day in the farm itself. This should be playing, there we go. And this is where you start. Massive field, loads of weeds. How do you even get through all of it? With a lot of patience, I must say. But from the beginning of the game, you meet the locals. As soon as you arrive into Stardew, you meet two people already that introduce you, take you to your farm, introduce you to the dynamics, how the post office works, where you can get things, and they gift you some items as well, and then they tell you to kind of come to them for anything you need. So in that sense, the kind of collaborative aspects of it is already there from the beginning, and it does really feel wholesome, and as I said before, kind of fills that gap that a lot of people might feel. It sounds very depressing, and I love my life, don't worry, but I think it just gave me that kind of perspective of, you know, what is it that we yearn for? Is there something more, and how can we fill those gaps? But equally, it was about making friendships, and it was about meeting other people and reaching out, which I think our community and people in general don't do a whole lot of. I often just play The Sims on my own, and I build my house, and I get frustrated when I can't get the roof right, and I spend 3 hours on it, when I could just ask my friend to do it for me, or I could just download one from the gallery that someone built, but I don't for some reason, because that game isn't really about that. Whereas with Stardew Valley, if you struggle, you go to your neighbor. If you have weeds, you ask your neighbor for help, or for, you know, any chemicals that you might need. And even if you're stuck there and you're seeing everything and you don't really know how to figure it out, because there isn't a whole lot of prompts on what to do and how to do it, you have your community to help you. So I think rather than kind of spending a lot of time talking about the nitty-gritty of the game and the interactions and challenges, I just wanted to kind of focus on that, on the sense of achievement, of meeting new people, of overcoming difficulties and challenges with other people by your side, and the progress that you can make a lot quicker and a lot more efficiently and a lot better when you do band together and when you build something together. The sense of building together really comes to life even on the smallest of screens. But Stardew Valley not only offers escape, but also insight into how we help each other and how we work together. So I would strongly recommend for anyone wanting to play it or even considering it, to get into it, immerse yourself, and just enjoy the joyful world of building a farm in a village so that others can grow with you. Thank you.
I want to talk about games about care. So we already had some games about sort of things that are more like activities of self-care, like building a farm, or social activities that you have with other people in a sort of anonymous fashion. I'm just going to be talking more about care in a sort of philosophical pattern, because actually both games might not be like super nice to play always. They're a little bit confrontational, although they sort of have themes that connect this. So the two games I want to talk about is one, a quite recent one, is Eliza by Zachtronics, and the other is Tacoma by Fulbright. And we'll get into why I picked these two. We'll start with a bit of Tacoma. Tacoma is a so-called simulation game. And that means, in this case, that means physical simulation. It means you can throw darts, you can shoot balls, you can pick things up, you can throw them around, you can put them back. So it's mainly a physical simulation. The thing you can't actually do is really interact with people, which is sort of the irony of it all. So this game kind of follows on from Gone Home, the last game Fulbright made, and is very much in the same vein. If you're familiar with it, you kind of discover the story as sort of fragments scattered around you, and now with sort of added AR recordings of scenes that have already happened, but you don't really interact with it. In fact, it's so non-interactive that you could conceivably play the game by just looking at this little booklet in 4 different locations and waiting around an hour at each junction and then bringing the story to completion. Obviously, that's really boring, but it just sort of highlights the fact that the game doesn't really require much of you, and in that sense actually might be quite relaxing, as a lot of these sort of walking simulators are. It kind of invites you to go exploring at each location, but you're under no obligation to do so. And in this exploration, it gives you a sense of place by sort of dressing the environment in interesting ways and giving evidence of personality through decorations and other things. So the player as a bystander in this way is a very common strategy in video games that have very strong narrative focus. It makes it easier. Things are linear. You don't affect things. There are no branches. It gives you tight control. So in this way, it tells you a story by taking most of your control away. So to sort of introduce Eliza, here we have Eliza. In Eliza, you play a therapist in a visual novel type game. A visual novel is a type of branching stories that mostly offers you A, B, C, or D choices, and you explore each branch of the narrative as you go down it. And follows very much like a literary tradition. There's lots of words. There might be multiple paths, but it's still quite a traditionally told story. And in fact, actually, the writer of this game, Matthew Sayu Burns, started off with a tool called Twine, which some of you might be familiar with, which is a very popular tool to create interactive narrative that's all around branching storylines. So often visual novels and branching stories, they offer you lots of options, ways to travel around. Sometimes the branches come back together and sometimes they go apart. Eliza is actually quite extraordinary that it offers you very little to no choice. And as you can see here, you have one dialogue option that's even being fed to you by your Eliza program. You are in this case a proxy for a therapist, and you are being instructed by an automated script to that tells you what to respond to clients. In this case, you're saying hello to somebody by talking about the weather. So in a way, the story sort of propels you forward by its own volition. You really don't have much of any effect on it. That might be a bit strange for a game. Games usually are about interactivity and about affecting the narrative. And the open question is why is a story like this that virtually offers no choice at all not better served by a movie or a book? And in fact, we can see our first patient that we encounter in this visual novel echo that in his own ways. He is depressed and he thinks that nothing matters, just like our choices in this game, which also do not really matter. So even though you're not interacting with it, actually this very slide shows the tension that we do get from this interaction. The very notion that we're expected to interact with a video game, yet we only get to go forward as through a slideshow, very much like we're doing now, brings forward the central tension of the game is like, what does interactivity without consequence mean? And you start to express yourself through these sort of meaningless interactions. And the choice itself, and not so much the consequence, becomes interesting. The very fact that you're making a choice, even if you're forced to do it, sort of makes it your own. And it echoes the themes of the game, which are about hopelessness and powerlessness. So in that way, the game is quite neat. And the tension of this is brought to the foreground in sessions like this, where oftentimes you'll have more than one option, but here literally the proxy response, what you're supposed to say back to this person, is loading, and it's going to come back and tell you what to tell you, and that's then your only option. Again, sort of ramming home this notion of powerlessness in a way. We can also see this in sort of repeated lines like this. You will mention the weather over and over again with several patients that you see. These rote lines, these introductions feel very structured and sort of inadequate. You're supposed to be a therapist and help these people along somehow. Even when you go off script, it is instructed by you, by the program, right? Darren, I'm going to go get into trouble if I deviate from Eliza too long. Eliza being your instructing program, this cheers him up greatly as he now has the notion that he's talking to a human being, right? We can say, wait, say something weird, say something only a human would say. He's desperate, he wants some human connection. The script will provide. So even subversion of the scripted moment is actually easily scriptable in a way that I think is quite relevant in all sorts of ways that go beyond this presentation. But I thought it was an interesting point to make. We can also see the confines of the script. Here, you have just recommended a drug in a very American fashion. Ask your physician to request this drug for you because that's the way it works, and you probably have some kind of kickback deal going on. Somebody asks you for the name of that, and you're like, thank you for speaking with Eliza, your personal counseling partner. Obviously, you have no capacity to actually answer this question, and you can see the seams of the script appear. Again, bringing home this idea of powerlessness. And in fact, actually, it reminds me a lot of one of my favorite jobs in the past, which was working in a call center, where we had scripts very much like this, including strategies for keeping people on the phone, essential information to get in these kind of flow diagrams, and also, the control of going off script. And, we live in a world now that these therapy apps maybe not like as an AR overlay with like a human proxy such as an Eliza, but we certainly have therapist apps of different people and profiles you can find, people you can rate, and it wouldn't be that surprising if a lot of them follow templates and structure. And in fact, one of the things, the recent crazes, obviously, which this ties into, is this notion of wellness. If you work in office long enough, you'll be offered some kind of wellness course that is very expensive, and that will teach you breathing exercises and such. Or you might have encountered one of the virtual reality sort of meditative exercises such as this, and it's certainly in our future, this idea of the stress of modern life being taken away by a virtual picture of some kind of peaceful moment in a cute house somewhere, or maybe enigmatic things that you get from a phone app, horoscopes or whatever, or meaningful sayings that people give you on Facebook, you know, open-ended advice such as "there's no need to rush," which can be applicable anywhere really. You know, it's all this part of this sort of wellness thing, this sort of vaguely East Asian religious experience without calling it religious, like this wellness thing of taking it easy and, being less full of ego and all these things. Certainly this all fits into there. And, all of this is backed by what I would consider the modern church, the server room, right? All these apps are powered by rows and rows of machines. Even your machine you have at home, your mobile phone, is a very intricate, almost architectural product of worship in a way. And certainly if you look at pictures of big servers, you will find these grand perspective lines and lights. And there's something to be said. Maybe these are modern cathedrals. And in fact, actually, a lot of people make the connection of mysticism to these places. We can see here a conversation you have with somebody who runs the place, and, they think this therapy program, which is obviously trained by AI and lots of conversation, it trains itself, and here is given some kind of godliness or spiritfulness, something that we pray to, something that alleviates our pain. Maybe there's something to that, right? Maybe not in the sense of the runaway Frankenstein monster that we're all afraid of, the Skynet that is going to become sentient and decide that the world is better off without us, but maybe there is something for it to be said for these systems, like these rote scripts, these techniques of therapy, these methods of self-care, these retuned conversations you have with yourself and others, and that professionals have with you in various capacities. In some ways, they are the product of a lot of humanity. So perhaps slightly provocatively, the game also asks, maybe the script sometimes is enough and it does actually do something for us. And how often do we find ourselves repeating a script of some kind to comfort ourselves or comfort somebody else? And who are we to judge the artificialness of going through some scripted event of another and sort of like devoiding that of humanity? Well, it is also the product of humanity. It is unfortunately something that is entangled in very large corporations, such as this app. All this data crunching and this app making obviously takes a big financial organization. And this brings us back to Tacoma, a future that imagines us to study at universities such as Hilton U or Amazon University, after which you can graduate, get paid in company scrip, like their own kind of money, and be totally indentured. And then your misery will be sold back to you in the form of, automated daily health routines remembered by your closet, or holidays that are projected in your home for, vacation bungalows with families that look magically happier than your own. So in Tacoma, Eliza is a very sort of like private experience, whereas Tacoma sort of explores a social space. It sort of very effectively explores the boundary between sort of public and private faces. As we see these people on a spaceship, obviously something goes wrong and you have to investigate it and see what happens. You're a detective of sorts, but it's sort of like not, I mean, it's a reason to be there and kind of unfurl things, but it's really an excuse, a MacGuffin to get to know the people that go through this experience. And this is a nice little moment that illustrates how it operates. These people are no longer there. They're just as these holographic ghosts that you can play back at your leisure. And you can see them have public conversations, and then you can see them have private ones, such as this one, right? You can see these two people are walking away. They've just discussed the plan and says, oh, I can't believe everyone went along with this. So everybody has, either with their closer friends or in private, have these relationships to these more public moments. So we can, in this sense, we can explore the choices of other people, even though we can't interact with it. Whereas Eliza is about exploring the ineffectiveness of our own choices, perhaps. We can here, without influencing other people's lives, inspect their choices. And we get to explore these people's lives through artifacts that we see. They're no longer there, they're just echoes. And we can see them in private moments such as this one, where somebody here is talking to an AI, not unlike Eliza's proxy service. Here, Odin, the all-knowing AI of the ship, acts as a priest or a therapist or a god hearing prayer or some uncertainty. It doesn't give much good advice, but it's there and it listens. So we explore these various people through their artifacts, right? We see the front of their door, and we can see this person likes to keep their shoes outside of the door. This is sort of a salient detail that tells us something about his character. Other people are messy and clean. You know, we saw quite a clean office just a few slides ago, and now we're about to experience somebody's private moment, and we can see that behind the clean facade of the organized office, there's also things like drinking happening. And who would have thought that? Again, exploring the duality of like a public life and a private moment where somebody is clearly encouraged to drink a lot because they're sad. This kind of like gameplay has a long tradition in games. It's praised a lot. It's called environmental storytelling. It has a long history. Games like Half-Life or BioShock, of which the guys who made this are alumni, or System Shock, other kinds of shock. They all sort of play with this, and they're praised for this because the cinematic or strong narrative experience before this was characterized by cutscenes that take away the control, and you sit and watch something, and when you're interacting with something, being disturbed to watch a cutscene is something a lot of people don't like. So what they do instead is they spray blood on the walls, and they leave weird toys around and other sort of artifacts of humanity, and people analyze those in a sort of observant or kind of pervy way, if you will. It's interesting that the guys here, they worked at BioShock, and you can see that they have actually taken the element of environmental storytelling and sort of wrested it loose from the notion of shooting other people in the face, which was always what was happening in tandem with that. And they just thought, well, hey, what happens if we just do the storytelling bit? Won't that be nice? And in fact, actually, it is quite nice. I recommend the game. It's nice. The reason, environmental storytelling also works is, cutscenes takes away control. There's no interactivity. With environmental storytelling there is, but there's no interactivity with people. Actually, interactivity with people is very hard to simulate for all sorts of reasons that I won't get into, but even like authoring the story level on a notion you can say anything to anybody, you can imagine the amount of things that you would have to author to actually successfully bring such a story to close. And there's also a question of how clear a story you could tell with something like that. So I mentioned Twine and Eliza, so Matthew, the author, he started off writing stories in Twine, and this is what it looks like. go and try it, it's great. But basically, you can see here all the branches and the choices, they lead to different bits. You can imagine what kind of explosion it would lead to if you actually wanted to make a lot of things possible in every scene, and you didn't bring points back together, or you didn't limit people's choices. We simply do not have enough people in the world to make that work. So here we see somebody in their office again, sort of like presenting. So in this sort of like this idea of this notion of looking at other people's stuff and seeing what they go through, it kind of managed to be more personal and less personal in Eliza. Less personal because you're not the one making the choices, but also more personal because you get to explore the other in both their public and their private being. And you can see here, this manager of the station is doing something sneaky and private. Okay, right. Right. Here, the private nature of Eliza also plays a large role in the story. This is her room, and here she's telling that she's sort of like turned away from the world, just hiding out here. The clean office of the therapist office is sort of neatly contrasted in the sort of semi-messy state her room is in. And the game actually sort of like quite neatly underlines the fact that you don't have any choice, and your period where you kind of turn away from the world and just stay at home is not really walking away from your life in a substantial way at all. And by the end of the game, you actually have a choice. Rather than retreat, you need to choose a new way forward. And that way, it sort of gives you the option to actually do something with your life afterwards, which is interesting. And then finally, Tacoma sort of ends you with that sort of the AI helping you out. It sort of helps you out in that computery way where it can't tell you what to do, but it can tell you what you probably should be doing in sort of Volta terms. And as such, it kind of helps somebody save the members of the ship through this tragedy that you're playing through. Again, sort of like giving rise to the notion that maybe AI imbued with all our experience might have some humanity after all. So I don't know, I thought that was two quite nice sort of semi-connected messages. I would invite you both to play these games. They're both very good voice acting and good writing. And I think they both explore interesting notions of what it means to care.
First, we thought we'd talk a bit about your experience of gaming. I mean, my memory of you is at a conference talking about how the wonders of your youth when you suddenly realised the television could be something that you didn't just watch, but that you could plug something in the back and it was suddenly you were in control of the television by playing a game with it. And it always struck me that was a really interesting metaphor, because having grown as an old situationist, I thought that was are you just being sucked further into hyper-reality, as Jean Baudrillard said, or are you really breaking the spectacle and actually making your own TV?
I mean, I guess it depends, who you are and what your context is. I mean, I think the reason why, and I usually hate telling stories, but I think the reason why the story of maybe my or your discovery of video games might be illustrative or useful is we were alive before they existed. So in some ways, if you're not native to a particular media environment, you have a little bit more perspective on the change. So if you were alive before manuscript writing, and then suddenly there's people writing things, you're going to say, oh, wow, look how things change now that we can write stuff down. People are lying, people are writing contracts, people are putting down their histories. And I felt, the first moment I saw a video game, it was actually in a hotel. It was a console in a hotel. And it was, like, for most people of my generation, it was a game called Pong, which was two white squares on either side of a black and white monitor.
Mine was Space Invaders in a pub.
Yeah, Space Invaders was a drop later, but yeah. And with Pong, it was these two white squares, and then you're hitting a little ball back and forth, a little dot between these two squares. And anyone from my generation remembers where they were and when it was that happened. The same way that we remember, the moon landing or an assassination. It was, oh my God. And when you think back to that moment, we were not thinking in America, oh, what a beautiful simulation of table tennis. This is fantastic. We're going to be able to practice table tennis on this new game and then compete more effectively against the Chinese when we're, at the next Olympics. It's not what we were thinking. All we were thinking was, oh my God, I can move the pixels on the television screen. This formerly sacred turf of Walter Cronkite and I Love Lucy and whoever was allowed to make TV, had such power to be able to put their images on that box in the living room, this magic act. And now the pixel had been liberated, the technology had been demystified, and we could just play. So the television, really changed for a lot of us from this read-only medium to a kind of a read-write medium, to something where even to imagine, this was before we had, video cassette recorders and could make TV ourselves, but it was the very beginning of taking control of the pixel and then of having stories on the television where I'm the protagonist, rather than me watching some Aristotelian hero go up his inclined plane of tension and down. Now I'm the player making at least what feel like choices through a game world. And that it fundamentally shifted our relationship to television. And I think it opened up the idea, at least for a moment, for those of us who were alive during that transition, that if this medium has been arbitrarily a read-only medium for the last 50 years, and now it's a read-write medium, what other media in our lives and in our world could be flipped, thanks to digital technology, into read-write media? And for me, that flip always meant playability. For me, playability was synonymous with, is it open to my intervention?
So
and that could be because...
Is Pong Internet 1.0 then?
In some ways, there's certainly interactivity 1.0 but because it wasn't really networked. It wasn't a networked phenomenon, but you were ideally playing against another person. There were two knobs, two joysticks, and it did turn the TV into a way to meet rather than just to be alone.
So now we have this, it's gone all the way through over 30, 40 years, and we have this whole phenomenon of gamification with Jane McGonigal, classic Californian ideologist who goes jogging in Berkeley, saying that we can use the game metaphor, this interactivity that you talk about, to actually create all the parts of our lives. We can actually make ourselves happy workers for surveillance capitalism through gamification.
Once I hear people talking about using a medium, oh, we can use this medium to get people to not like war, to get people to work against hunger, get people to do that. Now it's using the media platform as propaganda. How are we going to get people to do something? So I'm using the technology on the people. And that's whenever you get a liberative technology, what I call bad people, but the controlling people, the ones who don't trust humans, they'll say, oh, how can we use this to control human behavior? So you'll have, Norbert Wiener talk about systems theory, and then Margaret Mead come along and say, oh, how can we use systems to understand and control human beings? Or in this case with games, oh, so there are these people playing together and learning things and cheating and spoil sports and all that, but what we can do is impose the content we want into the games in order to program human behavior. And, once games get serious in that way, and I get it, there's some great ways to convey important ideas through games, the same way you can in a book or a nonfiction book or any documentary, but I think that you end up sacrificing the more vital and important element of games, which is play. And the spirit of play gets broken once you're applying the play to a particular thing. This was one of the rules of play in Huizinga's great book, Homo Ludens, means man the player. It is that when you play, you create a sacred circle around the play. And once you step into the sacred circle, nothing can matter. In other words, a player who's playing basketball for the money and the contract, that's not play, that's work. Once you're playing for a reason, or if you win this game, then you get the money, or you get the girl, or whatever it is, you've broken the genuine spirit of play. And that's serious games feels like applied play, like applied sexual energy or applied anything is no longer. You might lose the essence of the thing. You know, what Horkheimer would call the capital R reason for something gets surrendered to the small r utilitarian reason to exploit it.
Do you think then games should be completely non-utilitarian? They've got to be trivial, to be the escape from work, or can they actually be used for work purposes? I mean, you know,
non-utilitarian is not synonymous with trivial.
Yeah.
Right? Non-utilitarian.
I'm just winding you up
sacred,
for yes,
right?
yeah.
You know.
But we can use games for education, for
Yes,
subversion.
yes. Right, as long as we also, I mean, yes, we can apply anything, and that's fine. But I wouldn't want to apply games at the expense of the sacred phenomenon of gaming, the sort of sacred collaborative enterprise of gaming. What happens in a fantasy role-playing game between 5 kids who are making up their own story, those kids will have a fundamentally different experience of life than kids who only watch, Game of Thrones on TV.
So are we going to move from competitive gaming to collaborative gaming? A lot of people think at the moment, this is the radical thing, is not to actually have one-on-one competition or multiple competition, that we should all play games where we learn to work together. But that maybe is also what, Jane McGonigal is also saying, that we collaborate through gamification to make more money for the man.
Well, gaming and gamification are almost, to me, the opposite things. So, yeah, I do like collaborative play as practice for collaborative life. And I love the idea of, instead of having board games like Monopoly, these sort of winner-takes-all games, training our kids for life, and rather have them work together to solve a problem. And you win as a group, or you win even as a team. It's better than as an individual. But yeah, to have different kinds of outcomes, and to learn to trigger, whatever, serotonin and dopamine and all those oxytocin things that you want to trigger, but learn to trigger them through collective success. The interesting thing about gamification is it tries to take the energy of play, even agonistic kind of competitive play, and then apply it to something else. But most of the things that I see, that business talks about as being gamified, the gamification, if anything, just camouflages the fact that these are already games. Right? The stock market is not a real thing. The stock market is a gamification of the market. The market is a gamification of sharing. So now we're going to gamify the stock market. Why do that except to try to make the stock market look more real? It's back to your Baudrillard. It's like, let's do a simulation of that. So it makes the simulation, the simulation that you're simulating then looks real in comparison with the game that you've just created.
But can we learn through gaming? Is that the utilitarian way?
Sure. Well, we do learn through gaming. What is you're going to practice for the math quiz. Yeah. There's going to be a math quiz. Does that mean you've entrusted this 11-year-old to build a bridge based on the equations he learned about angles? No. You're going to take a quiz and you're going to get a score. The quiz is gamification of the knowledge of the building. So yeah, education is already gamified.
But how can we subvert that?
The way we subvert that is, and I think it's a necessary subversion, is to because if we keep going in that direction, we're going to say that, you use an iPad in the class and the kid's going to play a better game, a better quiz game, and Quizlet and this and that. You end up emphasizing memorization and things like that. I think the way we subvert that is by deciding that the most important thing that you can learn in the classroom is how to socialize with the other people in the room, is the sort of the mimesis experience that you get by being in the room with an adult who is demonstrating the practice of learning and discovery for you. So now it becomes much more about your body and their body, and how does it make me feel to watch someone else learning, and how do I imitate that behavior? It's very different than I'm going to play the game of, raise my hand and have the right answer.
So is this how we all join as members of Team Human?
It's one of the ways we do, is by looking for the ways that figure and ground have been reversed in our society. When was teaching, which, as I understand the history of it, public education, when was teaching, which was meant, at least by some, as reward for the working class? If they're working in the coal mines all day, at least they deserve the dignity of being able to read a book and participate meaningfully in democracy, that it was turned into an extension of work, where we have the principals of our schools and presidents of our universities going to CEOs and asking, what do you want our students to learn so they'll be better workers, right? So corporations are externalizing the cost of worker training to the public school system, and the very purpose of education is undermined. The dignity, the idea that it was compensation is completely reversed. So we look for opportunities to restore the integrity, the essential value, the capital R reason, the non-utilitarian right that humans have to celebrate their existence just for having gotten here in the first place.
So we want to celebrate the dignity of play.
Well, play is one of the best ways to do that. Wait a minute, you're not accomplishing anything? No. It turns out this is not training you for anything in particular. This is just fucking play. You are just celebrating being alive and engaging with other people on this field. That's what Huizing has said. He said, we all try to think, that dogs and wolves, they play as practice for the hunt. And he said, no. They hunt in order to have enough food so they can play. Play is the goal, not the means.
Okay, we're going to open up some questions now from your London fans. Okay, questions, please. Anyone got a question?
Or a thought,
a thought. Yes.
You're going to have to speak really loudly.
Julia.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Do I need to do that?
I think you just have to shout.
Hi, Julia Yurchenko here. I'm a lecturer in political economy and an enthusiast of alienation, gaming, and other things. I really enjoyed your talk, and this event is fantastic. What I do want to push you on, and I want us all to think about, is the gender dimension of the function of games in socialization of human beings. This whole idea that game is just a game is the perception of bourgeois mentality. Games play a function of socializing people into performing specific roles in society since societies existed. Games existed as leisure, but they always also played a serious function in teaching children how to do adult things. And that is very detailed, documented in anthropology and ethnography and so on and so forth. And so when I hear this appeals about games that, oh, come on, it's just a game, there shouldn't be utilitarian or you have utility to them, it makes me think that, well, this is not my experience of games that I was taught growing up as a girl. Because the games that girls are taught are being trained to be mothers, and they're being given little kitchens, and they're being taught to sew, and all of those kind of things. Whereas boys are being told to ride cars and be dangerous and throw caution to the wind. So there is this underlying gender dimension that I want us all to think about when we try to think about what function games play. And I think games are fantastic because, yes, they do have that utility, and socialization is very important. It can be played to discipline society, but also to empower individuals to become somebody very important. And that's why it's so fantastic that, you know, we can, through changing games and how we approach games, we can show boys that it's okay to raise children or cook food or whatever. But at the same time, of course, it can. There is also this dimension where those in power can manipulate masses through games and socialization. So it's just kind of, I'm not sure if it's a comment or a question, but if you would like to perhaps say something along those lines, because you have said quite a few things that made me think quite a few different things about these areas in your thinking. If you'd like to flesh it out a little bit more, it would be great. Thank you.
Does your daughter think you're a patriarch when you play games?
Yeah, I mean, games certainly serve a social function. You know, when you think about little boys in particular having, you know, fights, when they have play fights, part of the importance of the play fight is that you learn how far can you push it before the other person, you know, kind of wants to tap out. What's too painful and what's not, even in kind of verbal play. When have I actually hurt someone's feelings or not? And it does. It socializes you to understand what are the limits and how do I recognize that. You can even see dogs when they're fighting. They kind of figure out how hard can I bite and still have it and still be okay. And I agree that that gaming or play does prepare us in a certain way for specific roles in society. But the one place I would push back is how exactly is it training us? And I would argue that play trains us differently than real training. So playing house or playing cooking doesn't necessarily train the kids for the actual tasks that they're doing, but it conveys to them a certain essence of what these activities are. So it's not the technique that they're learning so much as the approach or the attitude. That's why I talked about mimesis in the classroom. So you're in the classroom, you see your teacher learning, and then you play at teaching. It's imitative play, there is a function to it, but it's not quite like the utilitarian functions of industrial society. It's not play that you learned how to cook cupcakes for 200 people. It's that you've got to pretend you're mixing stuff and feel, now I'm making cupcakes. And what is that? You know, so it's something else. I would argue something more subtle is transmitted. But yeah, there's definitely a social and function to it.
There's a man with a beard right at the end.
Beard talking. I would say it's about identity formation. So, lady is quite right. It is good. How is it practicing? Because it's forming an identity. It doesn't matter whether they're practicing the actual real tasks. They're forming an identity about their gender roles and what is appropriate for their gender roles. I say this as a father of a 5-year-old daughter, and I hate all that pink shit. So, she's got to have like options. She can choose pink on her own terms, but not because I pressured her or anyone else pressured her. So it's about like what is appropriate. So I'm a former teacher, I'm now a lecturer, and I'm an academic. I research games, and I noticed when I was a school teacher that gender identities are very well formed by the age of about 12, 13, I noticed. So I taught my year 7s, which in this country is 11 and 12-year-olds. And a lot of the girls are quite happy to play games, and in primary schools in this country, they do quite a lot of like learning to make games and stuff like that. But by the time when I left my former teaching job and I said I'm going to the games industry, like the girls in year 7, like the 11, 12-year-olds, like, oh, that's pretty cool, that's quite rad. But the girls from like who are 13, 14 years old and older, like, oh my God, that is so sad, man. Like, how could you even do that? I did teach in East London. Like, so how's that so that it's so sad? Like, why do you want to go into the games industry, etc. And it is very pejorative and very down because like they saw games as something that's not for them. They see technology as something not for them because they have already, consciously or unconsciously, and I would argue mainly the latter, they have started to take on what is an appropriate thing for them as women to do or not do. And so that is where those games are training people for society. They don't have to know the details, they just have to know what is appropriate for their gender role or not.
Did you get that, Doug?
Most of it. I mean, I don't know that it's begging for a response necessarily, though. I mean.
Hi, Douglas. I wondered, we've talked a little bit about play versus game, and my observation here is, as a late 40s man, I've noticed that the idea that I'm allowed to play games as I've grown up is slowly becoming more acceptable. There was a period of time when playing computer games in my 20s and 30s was actually less acceptable than doing so in my 40s and 50s because of the rise of the industry. But I've yet to see any expectation of a similar, it's okay to play. And I think I like the fact that we're drawing a distinction between gaming and playing. And it's almost like, okay, we've accepted that it's okay for someone to play games now, but it's still the games that matter and not the play. Can we boost the play, and how might we do that?
Well, the only way to boost the play would be to take down capitalism.
Okay.
I mean, real seriously. And we've got Richard for that, so thank God. No, but I mean, obviously the reason why play is acceptable for adults is because finally play or gaming has been made as expensive as any other adult activity. So now, sure, you can spend $500 on a console and $200 for a subscription to a game per month or something, and then hire someone else to actually build your character for you. I mean, it's big business. So sure, everybody's welcome now, to do that. The way I think that to make real play okay again would be to somehow, and this is a longer conversation, but is to find ways to carve out space for non-commodified human activity. And that's the whole message of Team Human, that find the others and spend time, breathe with them. When you spend 2 minutes looking into someone else's eyes or holding their hands, you're not spending anything. That, to me, is revolution. Just sitting with other people. What you're doing, sitting in a space together, breathing together, is conspiring, literally, conspire, to breathe together. That is the great conspiracy against capitalism, is people spending unproductive time with one another.
Not expending their labour value to create surplus value. On that thought, thank you. Thank you very much, Doug. That was, as usual, a wonderful contribution. We'd love to have you here in person, but hopefully next time, yeah? Lots of love from London.
Yeah, right. I'll be there. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
You're a sweetie, as usual.